This is a free preview. To purchase the full 3.3-hour ad-free audiobook, please see details in the description. Enjoy. Weather Recording 1. October 17th. Mike Gilberton, Senior Field Climatologist, North Fork Atmospheric Research Station, Yukon Territory. Local time, 1842. Exterior temperature, minus 11.8 degrees Celsius, and falling at approximately 0.6 of a degree per hour. Barometric pressure, 100.9 kilopascals, steady. Relative humidity, 72%. Wind from the northeast at 11 kilometers per hour, gusting to 19. Snow depth at the primary stake, 23 centimeters. Visibility greater than 15 kilometers beneath a clear sky, though a narrow band of cirrus has appeared along the western horizon since 1600. Aurora activity is expected to be moderate tonight according to the last forecast packet received from Whitehorse, but the station magnetometer is showing fluctuations that I would describe as substantial rather than moderate. I will return to that in a moment. First, I am making this supplementary recording because the automated transmission system failed again at 1726. The satellite modem remains powered, and the diagnostic panel indicates no hardware fault, but the dish has not established a stable uplink for nearly 90 minutes. This is the third communications interruption in 4 days. Each has coincided with unusual magnetometer readings, although I do not yet have enough data to claim a relationship. I have reset the modem twice, inspected the exterior cable, cleared a small amount of rime from the dish housing, and confirmed that the generator is supplying consistent voltage. The problem is not here. Or, more accurately, the problem does not appear to be here. I am recording locally until the connection returns. When it does, these files will be forwarded to the Northern Climate Directorate along with the raw instrument logs, assuming anyone in the office still remembers how to open a compressed archive without asking one of the younger technicians. That last remark was not intended for the official record, though I suppose it is part of the official record now. At 63, a person becomes less concerned about appearing appropriately solemn in front of machines. Machines have been observing me for almost 40 years, and not one has filed a complaint. I am scheduled to leave North Fork in 26 days, weather permitting, after which Dr. Elise Ward will take over the winter rotation. This is intended to be my final field assignment. I have said that before. My wife, Anne, has written the retirement date on the kitchen calendar in red ink, surrounded it with a box, and placed 3 exclamation marks beside it, which is generally how Anne communicates that a matter is no longer open to scientific debate. We have a small house outside Whitehorse, a wood stove I have promised to replace, and a canoe that has spent more years hanging upside down in the shed than floating in water. There are worse futures. There are also warmer ones. At present, however, I am alone at North Fork with enough diesel for 8 weeks, enough food for 10, and a communication system that appears to have developed an aversion to the sky. The station lies approximately 140 kilometers from the nearest maintained road, in a broad valley between 2 unnamed ridges east of the Porcupine watershed. The main structure is a prefabricated building raised on steel pilings, 34 feet long and 16 feet wide, containing the operations room, galley, sleeping compartment, equipment bay, and a washroom that freezes every January, regardless of what the maintenance manuals claim. A smaller generator shed stands 40 meters southeast. The instrument field lies to the north, enclosed by a low wire fence intended not to keep wildlife out, which would be impossible, but to discourage caribou from rubbing themselves against several $100,000 worth of government electronics. Beyond the instrument field, black spruce and tamarack descend toward the frozen creek. The surrounding country is open enough that large animals can usually be seen long before they approach the buildings. That visibility is one reason this site was selected. Another is the absence of people, roads, mines, aircraft corridors, and nearly every other complication that contaminates long-term atmospheric measurements. Solitude in climatology is considered an asset. After 13 days here, I would still agree with that assessment, though perhaps less enthusiastically than I did when the helicopter left. The magnetometer anomaly began at 3:17 this morning. I was asleep when the first alarm sounded, and because the station alarm uses the same shrill tone for a magnetic excursion as it does for a refrigerator malfunction, my initial concern was for the frozen meat. By the time I reached the operations room, the horizontal component had deviated by 640 nanoteslas from the station baseline. That is not unprecedented during a geomagnetic storm, but the direction of the shift was unusual, and the rate of change was extreme. Over the next 9 minutes, the trace climbed, collapsed, reversed, and then settled into a pattern of oscillations with a period of approximately 47 seconds. I checked the sensor housing at first light. No ice buildup, no damaged cable, no nearby metal object. I walked the perimeter with the handheld compass and found the needle drifting as much as 18 degrees east of magnetic north before snapping back with sufficient force to make the housing tremble in my hand. At 8:40 the anomaly ended. At 11:12 it resumed. At 13:03 it ended again. The third episode began shortly after sunset and is continuing as I speak. The vertical field component is now fluctuating beyond the configured alert threshold, yet the auroral oval forecast does not support activity of this magnitude at our latitude. It is possible that the forecast is wrong. It is possible that the station equipment is malfunctioning. It is also possible that some local crustal phenomenon is distorting the measurements, though I know of no mechanism that would produce this pattern without associated seismic activity, and the seismometer has remained quiet. The animals noticed before I did. I am aware of how that sentence sounds, particularly from a scientist, and I have considered deleting it. I will not. Observation is observation, and the purpose of a field record is not to make the observer look sensible after the fact. At 6:10, while inspecting the precipitation gauge, I saw a line of snowshoe hares along the southern edge of the instrument field. There were perhaps 20 of them, which is more than I have ever seen gathered in one place, though population density is high this year. Every animal was sitting motionless on its hind legs. Every animal was facing north. When I approached, none fled until I was within 10 meters. Then they scattered simultaneously, not away from me but east and west, leaving the northern side of the clearing open. At 7:25, 6 ravens landed on the anemometer mast. They also faced north. They remained there during 2 wind gusts, strong enough that they had to spread their wings to maintain balance. Ravens are curious, adaptable birds, and frequently show behavior that appears meaningful only because human beings are determined to interpret it. I told myself that at the time. At 9:50, I saw 3 cow moose and a yearling standing in the frozen creek bed, again facing north. They did not browse. They did not move. Steam rose from their backs in the sunlight, and for 11 minutes they stood as rigidly as specimens in a museum display. When the magnetometer trace collapsed at 10:01, all 4 animals turned west and moved into the trees. At 11:12, when the second magnetic excursion began, the station's exterior camera recorded a red fox walking directly into the wire fence around the instrument field. The fox struck the fence, recoiled, and walked into it again. It repeated this action 7 times. There was no visible injury, and when I went outside, it ran from me normally. I examined the snow for evidence of blood, disease symptoms, or anything suggesting neurological impairment. I found none. At 13:30, a flock of ptarmigan flew low over the station from south to north. That is not their usual direction of movement at this time of year, though local weather can produce temporary reversals. At 14:05, the sonic recorder near the creek captured sustained wolf vocalizations from at least 2 locations. Wolves are common in this region. Hearing them is not noteworthy. What is noteworthy is that the calls continued for nearly 40 minutes without the usual spacing, response structure, or movement across the valley. It sounded less like communication and more like distress. I listened to the recording through headphones after lunch. I have worked in northern field stations since 1987. I have heard wolves at close range, from inside tents, from helicopters, from riverbanks, and once from beneath a spruce tree I climbed with considerably more urgency than dignity. The sound on the recorder was wrong. I do not mean supernatural, I mean biologically inconsistent. The howls overlapped without regard for pack hierarchy. There were barks, yelps, growls, and high, breathless whining, all coming from adult animals. In the background, beneath the calls, I could hear branches breaking. The breaks occurred at irregular intervals but appeared to be moving toward the recorder. When the sound came within approximately 50 meters, every wolf became silent at once. 4 seconds later, the recorder registered a single low impact. It was strong enough to overload the microphone and produce clipping. Then nothing for 23 minutes. I inspected the area at 1510, carrying bear spray, the 12-gauge emergency shotgun, and the station radio. Though the radio was useless beyond the local repeater, and the repeater has not answered since yesterday. The snow along the creek showed abundant wolf tracks. I estimated 9 animals, possibly 11, moving in several directions. The tracks converged near the acoustic sensor. There were signs of agitation, churned snow, claw marks, urine, and several patches of coarse gray fur caught on the lower branches. I found no blood and no remains. 50 meters north of the sensor, I found a spruce tree broken approximately 9 feet above the ground. The trunk was 14 centimeters in diameter at the break. I have seen trees damaged by wind, snow load, bears, and falling timber. This tree had not split under weight. The trunk had been bent downhill until the fibers tore. The top lay pointing south. There were no claw marks, no antler scoring, no surrounding deadfall. The nearest large track was blurred by loose snow, and I could not identify it with confidence. It measured approximately 40 centimeters long and perhaps 18 centimeters wide. The impression was too indistinct to establish whether it had been made by a paw, a boot, overlapping tracks, or falling debris. I photographed it with a scale marker and returned to the station before dusk. I am not drawing conclusions from one damaged tree and one poor impression. I am stating only what I observed. At 17:03, the wolves appeared. There were 7 at first, emerging from the spruce north of the instrument field. They came into the clearing in a loose line, not trotting, not hunting, but walking slowly with their heads low. The largest was a dark male with a scar across its muzzle. I have seen him twice during previous rotations and identified him in station photographs. He is normally cautious and has never approached within 300 meters of the buildings. Tonight he walked directly to the fence and stopped. The others spread out along the northern side. I was inside the operations room when I noticed them, and I watched through the main window. None looked at the instruments. None sniffed the snow. Every wolf stared at the station. I stepped onto the exterior platform and shouted, "That is standard procedure. Human voice, raised arms, noise. In most cases, wild wolves disappear immediately. These did not." The dark male lifted his head. The fur along his back rose, and I could see his lips draw away from his teeth. The sound he made was not a howl. It was a low, continuous growl, steady enough that I felt it through the metal grating beneath my boots. I shouted again and struck the railing with a shovel. 2 of the younger wolves flinched. The others moved forward. The fence is only waist-high. It is not electrified. The first wolf cleared it without touching the upper wire. I went inside and locked the door. I want to make clear that I did not panic. Fear is not panic. Fear is useful information delivered quickly. I placed the shotgun on the operations desk, loaded 4 shells into the magazine, and switched on the exterior floodlights. The lights usually drive animals away. Instead, the wolves came closer. They spread around the station with a degree of coordination I initially interpreted as hunting behavior, though wolves do not generally regard an occupied metal building as prey. One moved beneath the western window, another circled toward the fuel tank. The dark male remained at the bottom of the entrance stairs, looking up at the door. He did not bark or leap. He simply stood there, and I had the disturbing impression that he understood the purpose of the entrance. At 17:26, the satellite connection failed. At 17:31, something struck the southern wall. The impact shook a mug from the galley shelf. I turned, expecting to see a wolf at the window, but the southern side of the station has no window. The exterior camera showed only darkness and blowing snow illuminated by the floodlight. The wind had increased to 24 kilometers per hour, though not enough to move debris of significant size. I heard scraping beneath the floor, followed by a heavy thump against one of the steel pilings. The wolves outside became agitated. Several began pacing rapidly, glancing not at the station now, but toward the southern tree line. That detail matters. Until then, I had assumed the wolves were focused on me. After the impact, their behavior changed. Their tails lowered, their ears flattened. The dark male backed away from the stairs. One wolf began whining, the same high, breathless sound recorded near the creek. They gathered together on the north side of the building and stared past the station toward the trees. The third magnetic excursion began at 1734. The operations room lights dimmed, though the generator output remained stable. Both compasses mounted beside the map swung north, overshot, rotated east, and began trembling. The data trace climbed vertically across the monitor until the software rescaled the graph. At the same moment, every wolf in the clearing lowered itself to the ground. Not crouched, not prepared to spring. Flattened, their bellies pressed into the snow. Their heads remained raised, but only slightly, their eyes fixed south. I have never seen wolves behave that way except in the presence of a dominant member of their own species, and even then not an entire group at once. The dark male crawled backward until his hindquarters touched the fence. He was still looking toward the tree line. I switched the southern camera to infrared. At first I saw nothing but spruce trunks, snow, and thermal noise. Then one of the trees moved. That is the simplest description, though of course the tree did not move. Something passed behind it. The camera registered a vertical area of warmth approximately 30 meters beyond the generator shed. It was partly obscured and visible for less than 2 seconds. I replayed the footage 3 times. The shape appeared taller than a man. That statement is based on comparison with the generator shed, which is 8 feet high at the roofline. The upper portion of the heat signature seemed to rise above it, though perspective, slope, and sensor distortion could account for the apparent height. The shape disappeared behind the spruce. 7 seconds later, the generator shed door rattled. The shed door is secured with a steel latch. It rattled again. The wolves broke. All 7 ran north across the instrument field. 2 struck the fence rather than jumping it. 1 became tangled briefly in the wire and screamed with such force that I nearly opened the station door without thinking. It tore free, leaving blood and fur on the upper strand, and followed the others toward the creek. They did not look back. Their flight was not controlled movement away from a threat. It was blind panic. The magnetometer reached its highest recorded deviation at 1736. Something walked around the generator shed. I could hear each step through the station wall. The snow is deep enough that even a large animal should move quietly, but these steps came with a packed, deliberate compression, followed by a faint granular slide. Step, pause, step, pause. Whatever was moving did not hurry. It crossed the camera's blind area between the shed and the southern wall. I raised the shotgun and stood behind the operations desk. The muzzle shook slightly, which I record because accuracy matters, and because at my age, pride is less useful than honesty. The footsteps stopped beneath the southern wall. For perhaps 20 seconds there was no sound. The magnetometer alarm continued chirping. The compasses trembled. The refrigerator compressor switched on with an ordinary mechanical hum so absurdly normal that I nearly laughed. Then something touched the siding. It did not strike this time. It pressed. The wall bowed inward by perhaps 1 centimeter between 2 structural braces, producing a long metallic groan. A tin of coffee slid toward the edge of the counter. I watched the wall flex and return to position. 3 seconds later, the pressure came again, higher this time, near the roofline. No grizzly bear in the Yukon stands tall enough to press that section of wall while keeping sufficient leverage to deform it. I am aware of that sentence, too. The pressure stopped at 1739. The footsteps resumed, moving west along the building. I tracked them by sound. They passed the sleeping compartment, then the washroom, then the equipment bay. At the northwest corner, the exterior motion light switched on. I saw a shadow cross the frosted window above the sink. It covered the entire window and continued upward beyond the frame. Then there was a knock at the door. 3 impacts, not scratches, not an animal colliding with the steps. 3 separate blows against the center of the steel door. The first was hard enough to shake frost from the interior frame. The second came 2 seconds later. The third came after another 2 seconds. I stood facing the door with the shotgun shouldered. I could hear breathing on the other side. Slow inhalations. Deep, rough exhalations. The bottom of the door is nearly 4 feet above the ground because of the pilings and stairs. Whatever was breathing stood on the platform. I did not speak. After approximately 1 minute, the breathing stopped. I heard the steps descend the metal stairs. There were 4 of them. The structure vibrated beneath each one. The motion light remained on as the footsteps crossed the snow toward the northern instrument field. I moved to the main window but saw nothing. The floodlights illuminated the clearing, the wire fence, the meteorological towers, and the tracks left by the fleeing wolves. Beyond them, the spruce formed a black wall beneath a rising green aurora. The magnetic trace began to decline. At 1748, the compasses steadied. At 1751, the satellite modem attempted to reconnect and failed. I waited until 1820 before lowering the shotgun. I have not gone outside. I will not go outside until daylight. I have secured both doors, covered the sleeping compartment window, and placed a portable motion sensor on the interior stair landing. I have also brought the emergency flare launcher into the operations room. The generator has fuel for 16 hours before the next transfer from the main tank is required. Normally, that transfer occurs automatically. The system is showing reduced pressure in the supply line, possibly because of cold, though the temperature is not low enough to explain it. I will monitor the situation overnight. I have reviewed the infrared footage frame by frame. There is insufficient detail for identification. The visible form could be a bear standing on its hind legs, although its movement appeared bipedal and continuous. It could be multiple animals overlapping in the camera field. It could be a sensor artifact associated with the magnetic disturbance. The sound of the footsteps may have been amplified through the station pilings. The deformation of the wall may have resulted from thermal contraction. The knocks may have been debris. Those explanations are individually possible. Taken together, they are not persuasive. I am ending this recording at 1907. Exterior temperature minus 13.2 degrees Celsius. Wind northeast at 14 kilometers per hour. Barometric pressure unchanged. Magnetic field values remain elevated but are gradually returning toward baseline. No wolves are visible. No further impacts have occurred. There is one additional observation. At 1856, while reviewing the exterior cameras, I noticed marks in the frost on the upper half of the station door. They were not present in the 1600 maintenance image. There are 5 parallel streaks, each approximately 23 centimeters long, descending from a broad smudge near the top of the frame. The marks are on the exterior surface. The highest is 7 feet 9 inches above the platform. I have measured the door often enough to know that without checking. End recording. Thank you for listening to this free preview. To access the full 3.3-hour ad-free audiobook, please see details in the description. See you again soon.